In this video, I'll go over 3 productivity tips that are easy to implement for engineers. Let's go. Specifically in structural engineering, as you progress in your career, it's typical for us structural engineers be looking for ways to improve our structural calculations, our design tasks, and just finding ways to be a little bit more productive. I think the first way that I've found to be very helpful to increase productivity is bookmarking things. Doing it physically, I made some videos on how to tab some manuals for the PE exam, but I also think that those manuals are very helpful to have tabbed up just on a daily basis. This is my first tip, is tab the manuals that you use the most. And I'll show you here the manuals that I use on a daily basis. So you can check on my very first video the steel manual tabs, just how I tabbed up the steel manual. And I use these tabs almost every single day. There are certain tabs that I use from those books. It's something that I'm very grateful that I did for the PE exam and also on a daily basis. And then I also have another video tabbing ACI 31814, and this is specifically for concrete design. And as a structural engineer doing mostly buildings, I use ACI all the time. So I think it's very helpful just knowing where to find things. I know this was something that a project manager once told me is, hey, knowing where to find things is just going to help you in your career, and that has proven to be true. I have ACI, or because the company has ACI, does not mean that I'll use it as much unless I actually dig through it and see what's in it. So just by knowing where to find rebar diameters or where to find minimum reinforcement ratios is really helpful. And then because I have the tabs and because it's easily accessible, I can go there in a matter of seconds and find the information that I need. Those are my top 2 books or manuals that I use on a daily basis that I have tabbed up. So if you have a manual or code tabbed up with tabs that you use on a daily basis, let us know in the comments below and we'll share the information with everyone. Now that I went over physical tabs, my second tip is doing the same thing but virtually. Many companies have a series of books and codes all digital in an electronic library. So I'm going to show you how I create some sort of shortcuts to get to certain places. This is my second tip, and I'll show you how to do it on your computer. So here I'll show you how to pretty much create a bunch of bookmarks that are easily accessible from your taskbar on your computer. So we're going to right click on this icon here and then go to Toolbars and then New Toolbar. And then here I know that I saved my folder here on desktop, and then it's just called engineering resources for the sake of this video. I don't have all these engineering resources here, but I know that probably at your job you may have, several codes. I know at my job I do, so it's easy to just have a folder that has all the reference material I use. For example, design criteria, you may have ASE and several other folders underneath. And then fasteners, you may have some fastener tables here, so all in one place. And then you select that engineering resources folder, select folder, and there you go. This is your master bookmark, and you can just click here, and now you can just hover over, for example, aluminum design. If you go to aluminum design manual, and then you can pretty much, instead of opening every single folder, you just hover over the folders and then more things open up. So ASE, you have ASE 7, and then you have all the different ones here. So these are just dummy examples, but I just filled out a bunch of folders here to show this as an example. For me, on a daily basis, I use personally ASE 710 or 716 all the time. Whenever I want to check a load combination, ASD versus LRFD, or check something from ASE 716, a loading criteria, I open it up very quickly, which is nice to be able to just open it up in a couple clicks. And it actually I've noticed that it makes me go to the code more often because it's so easily accessible. So that was the second tip. And then the third tip is to, again, do the same thing, but now on your browser with free resources that you use over and over again. And I'll show you what I do on a daily basis and how I bookmark certain websites. In summary, it's just hitting Control D. It's a shortcut. For example, if this tab here is, I'm just going to call it test, I hit Control D, and the folder is codes and standards, which I already have created. So I hit done, and when I go in here to codes and standards, test is right there. So the reason I think this is really important is because one of the most common errors in structural engineering, especially in the beginning of our career, is to not get the proper loads. And when it comes to wind loads, it's usually governed by the municipalities, whether it's the city building code or the county building code, the state, or just the country, or IBC, the International Building Code. So, for example, I'm here in Florida, and the first thing that I do is I go to the Florida Building Code. Let's say Florida 2020. In one click, I can open up the code online. I go to chapter 16, structural design, and then I go to wind loads. And I can see here the criteria for wind loads. This is the map for Florida, and you can see here 170 and 160, 180. But most importantly, I can go to specific sections for certain counties. For example, high velocity hurricane wind loads. I can click here, and then boom, I find out that Miami-Dade and Broward County have specific requirements. 170 for risk category 2 in Broward County, and 175 for Miami-Dade. And then I also find out that we should always consider exposure C, which gives a higher wind load pressure than exposure B. It should always be exposure C unless exposure D applies. So these are some requirements that maybe you're designing a building in an urban area and you think exposure B will suffice, but then you finish the whole design, you send it to the city for permitting, and then you get stuck with having to respond to building department comments and revise your drawings and calculations because the exposure was not correct. So this is a good way to always go back to the code where the most current information is. And then this is just an example for the Florida Building Code. For example, Palm Beach County, which is not listed there, has its own amendments, which if I do a Control F and do wind load, I can see here the maps, which, for example, for risk category 2 building, wherever it is in this zone, it's basically saying, hey, you cannot interpolate these wind speeds, use 170 miles per hour. You can only find this out going to Palm Beach County Building Code Amendments. This was my last tip. And besides building codes, you can also tab, just say, beam formulas that you have on the internet, or section properties, or useful websites. Just having things tabbed up, whether it's digital, physical, or just on your internet browser, I think it's really helpful to have information available at you in a matter of seconds. So I hope you enjoyed this type of content. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and let me know in the comments below what your productivity tip is. And I'll see you next time.